With that said, I want to introduce Marty Gringas, DFG. He's here from the Department of Fish and Game. He's been with the law end of it. He's talked to them, to higher up in the law end about when you have to tag a fish and that sort of thing. But he's mainly here to explain what hurts a fish, what's the best way to handle a fish, so it has the best chance to live when it goes back in the water. So with that said, I want to introduce Marty Gringas. Come on down. I want to ask you, after he's done, when he's done talking, after that, he'll stay around a little bit for some questions, throw some questions at him if you're not sure about what you're doing, and then he's going to be on his way after that. And we'll get on with the rest of the stuff.
Thank you very much, Steve. So thanks very much for preparing to participate in a really novel sturgeon fishing tournament. You know, last year was the first one. There have been some other tournaments recently that looked at conservation, but nothing quite like this. So this is really very cool. Like Steve mentioned, he just wanted me to mention a couple of things about taking care of sturgeon and a couple of things about the legal aspects of handling sturgeon. In preparation for this meeting, and actually I've been doing this for a long time, I've done a search of the scientific literature. There's nothing in the way of science on the impact of handling large fish. But in the scientific literature on handling little fish, most of that comes from the aquaculture literature. And what it shows very clearly about sturgeon is that if you take them out of the water, their blood turns acidic. It doesn't necessarily kill them right away. The other thing that it shows is that sturgeon in particular, they accumulate hormones, stress hormones, and they keep them for a long time, much longer than, say, some salmon and that kind of thing. So sturgeon have measurable effects of stress, and bringing them out of the water is one of the worst stresses of all. We know that you can take them out of the water, you can handle them, and put them back, and they'll live for a while. We know that because we tag sturgeon as part of a research and monitoring effort. We've been doing it for 50 years. And we know that most of the fish survive. But we also know that some of the fish don't survive. So there is a very strong scientific background for not taking fish out of the water.
5 minutes? 10 minutes?
I really wouldn't want you to do that. You know, there are measurable adverse impacts with just 1 minute from the scientific literature, just 1 minute of air emerge. They actually, in some of these studies, they actually show that just changing their depth, bringing them towards the surface and having their dorsal fin break the surface, stresses them out. So they really are truly sensitive. One of the other things, so we got some science that says clearly it's not good. Then we have best practices of people who've been fishing for years and years. And on the Columbia, well, in Oregon and Washington, where they've had, their sturgeon population has recovered fully from the depletions of the late 1800s, whereas ours hasn't quite. They developed very protective regulations and best handling practices decades ago. And the guides on the Columbia River system got together and said, look, we want to protect the big spawners. We want to have a catch and release fishery for the big spawners. So they developed themselves a series of best practices for catching sturgeon and handling sturgeon. And they promulgate that amongst themselves and all their customers and that kind of thing. And the upshot is they say use heavy gear, don't play the fish very long. When you bring it to the boat, roll it over, take the hook out, take your picture, and send it on its way. They actually have regulations up there that prohibit removing any part of an oversized fish from the water. So programmatically, they say don't take the fish from the water. But where the rubber meets the road, the guys, the people that do it day in, day out, don't take the fish out of the water. You know, it works very well. So there's a scientific background, and there's the best practices developed by fishermen. And incidentally, if you guys would like to develop best practices, the department would help you do the logistics and promulgate that stuff. We're really looking forward to guides and party boat captains getting together doing something like that. So now we get to the legal stuff. And I talked with the chief of law enforcement yesterday, told him what you guys were doing. He said, well, that's a very good thing. But he's a little concerned that people might expose themselves to getting nabbed by a warden if they don't handle this tagging situation correctly. So the upshot is, if you possess a sturgeon in its legal size, you need to put a tag on it. So now the question is, what is possession? And the upshot is, it truly is to the warden's discretion. And the wardens say, you know, if you're not doing something constructive with that fish and getting ready to send it on its way, you're liable to be construed as in possession of the fish. So when Steve says, you know, call me up when you hook up a fish so that they can get there before you bring it to the boat, that's a very good idea. I mean, that will make you very, very safe. If you have a sturgeon and it's on a snare and it's beside the boat for a half an hour and there's a warden watching you with binoculars, it's liable to be a problem. Now, if he watches you release it, that's a lot better. But the upshot is these laws were put in place to drastically reduce the probability that people can poach sturgeon, and in particular make money off of selling them. You know, you've seen all these big cases about people poaching sturgeon and selling them, even regular fishermen selling their sturgeon, their sport caught sturgeon, otherwise legally sport caught sturgeon, to these guys that are making big money off sturgeon. So, you know, these rules, they're to protect the fish, but they're also to stop the poachers. So, you know, do what you can to live within the spirit of the law. You know, if you find that you're 20 minutes away from a measurer, you know, maybe measure it and send it on its way or something like that. The other thing, I don't want to get everybody excited, you know, but even we finally have seen sea lions eating sturgeon. So if you bring a big sturgeon to the side of your boat, leave it there for a half an hour, you know, you drastically increase the odds it's going to get better. That's what I have for you guys. I hope you all do very well.
Say it's a close measurement and we need to bring it on the boat. What is the safest way to get on the boat to get it back in the water so it doesn't hurt the fish?
Right, good point. When we handle fish, we catch them in big nets and we bring them aboard. We never grab them by the gill plates. We grab them around the belly, grab them by the pectoral fins, and hoist them up. That's just to get into a working position. We then put them horizontally, so we hold them this way versus the necktie thing. It's very clear that they do well when they're held horizontally.
Upside down or right side up? Upside down or right side up?
We hold them right side up.
So you ain't gonna put extra people on duty tomorrow in the battery working?
I don't know.
Full force of the
You know, sturgeon, there's been talk that sturgeon can rupture their internal organisms, their internal organs and that kind of thing when you bring a fish out of the water. And I have found out that nobody has ever observed that in a dead sturgeon, you know, rupture the liver or anything like that. But I talked to the aquaculturists that use tomatoes, they say, you know, try not to take the fish out of the water and certainly handle them when you're taking them out of the water. They have these big skeins full of eggs, you know, and they're relatively fragile. They're not super fragile, but they're relatively fragile. And this is a little point of biology. Sturgeon don't spawn in these waters here, but you will find sturgeon with gigantic egg masses in them. They take between 2 and say 7 years to develop their eggs fully. So there are fish out there that are they got eggs, and you could damage their eggs, but they won't plan on spawning for several years. So even down here, even though they're not on spawning grounds, you can adversely affect the spawning. It might not kill it, but it might not spawn very well, you know, in your tank.
On the weight, on the leader, is it 6 inches from the hook or from the top of where the line that goes?
Asking the wrong guy, know nothing about
I believe it's 18 inches. 18 inches from the hook, you can't have a weight more than 5 inches down.
No, the notion is if you release a fish pretty darn quickly, you don't need to put your tag on it. But if you're going to keep it around for a long time, you're running, and if you don't tag it, you're running the risk of a warden thinking that guy is planning to scam on us with that fish. He's going to drive off without putting the tag on.
I'll address that.
Yeah, if you leave it in the water, the odds are much better. If you got somebody coming to you, you're not going to tag them. The plan is, if you guys do this right, nobody will put a tag on your fish if they're not going to bring them. Right. There are no studies on it. I would say that, you know, if the fish is very docile, and if you don't mess with the gills, it's probably going to be okay. But if you put it back on the tail and it gives you hard shapes and breaks, you know, the cartilaginous fish like shark, that breaks a little easier than bone. That's right.
Fixing the tag, it's the best method of doing it. The tags are very small.
Right.
It's the best method of doing it.
We specifically did not tell you guys what our plots were because we know that you'll come up with a good
So we need, so like our average fish.
whatever works.
How old are those fish in that slot range?
Great question. Great question. The fish in the slot range are between 9 and about 16 years old. And just so you know, those fish, these fish don't start spawning. Good point. The question was asked, how old are the fish in the slot limit? Well, there's two things actually. There's white sturgeon out there, and there's green sturgeon. And you guys take good care of green sturgeon because they're listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act.
They cut you too.
They're gnarly, chainsaw. Green sturgeon grows slower, so a green sturgeon is of a given size is older than a white sturgeon of the same size. But white sturgeon out there in the slot limit now are between 9 and about 16 years of age, 16, 18, something like that. And they don't start spawning, the females in particular, they don't even start spawning until they're 15 or so. So you guys are catching the young ones. You know, this is like catching shaker striped bass. These are the little guys. These are the guys that we want you to catch because there's a lot more of them than the older ones because these fish don't have any eggs because they're young and small compared to the big giant fish. So the whole management effort is designed to get a bunch of fish into the protected range so that they'll spawn like mad for 100 years. Produce a lot of babies that you guys can have.
It's not a 10,000 eggs, it's 100,000 eggs or more on a bigger sturgeon.
Yep. Sturgeon, he's talking about how there's a big difference in the number of eggs the bigger you get, and that's because the number of eggs is related to the volume of the fish, and the volume of the fish goes up in a curve compared to the length. So, you know, a long, high-volume fish has, you know, 10 times more eggs than a slightly smaller fish.
Since they don't spawn through where usually spawn, and once they get through, how often do they?
Right. The question was, if they're not spawning in the delta, where are they spawning, and how often do they spawn once they've started spawning? Green sturgeon actually spawn way the heck up in the Sacramento River and the tributaries in what is salmon habitat. Actually, they need really good water quality conditions. Their eggs are different than white sturgeon eggs. Their larvae behave differently than the white sturgeon larvae. They need really good water quality. That's probably why they're threatened with extinction. White sturgeon spawn up in the Sacramento River and some of the other tributaries. Way up there, they need cobble. Big cobble typically is where we find their eggs, that kind of thing. Sacramento, America. Right. They don't go up as high as green sturgeon. And in terms of once they start spawning, how often they spawn, it actually depends on the size of the fish. So if you get say a 6-foot white sturgeon spawning her first time, she may spawn 2 years hence because she's small. She doesn't have to devote as much energy to her egg mass. But if you get say a 10-foot sturgeon, those are the ones that maybe they spawn only one time every 7 years.
But they like to eat best.
When we get the guts, you know, there's a lot of clams in them, but up in the Columbia, I've read that they're pretty big on shad. Anything else?
Is there any